A guitar legend asked John Mayer one question in front of millions that was designed to destroy his career forever. 3 words, not yelled, not aggressive, delivered with surgical precision and the kind of casual cruelty that only comes from absolute certainty. Who taught you? New York City, the Beacon Theater, 2003, the annual induction ceremony where rock royalty gathered in tuxedos and designer gowns to celebrate themselves. Champagne flowed, industry executives air-kissed, publicists worked the room like chess masters. Nobody expected bloodshed. John Mayer stood on that stage, 25 years old, acoustic guitar in hand, 3 hit songs on the radio, a Grammy nomination, and the kind of baby-faced confidence that comes from success arriving too fast to question it. Across the stage, watching from the wings with arms crossed and eyes that had seen 40 years of guitar heroes come and go, stood a man whose name alone carried the weight of entire musical movements. A man who had shared stages with legends when John Mayer was still in diapers. A man who was about to remind everyone watching exactly what the difference was between popularity and mastery. The performance was supposed to be a tribute, a passing of the torch, a symbolic moment where the elder statesman blessed the rising star in front of all the cameras and industry power players who could make or break careers with a single phone call. Instead, it became an execution. And if you think you know how this story ends, if you've heard the rumors or seen the clips, I promise you don't know the half of it. Because what happened after the cameras stopped rolling, what was said in the hallway outside that theater, and what John Mayer did 6 months later in response, that's the part nobody talks about. If you want the full story from beginning to end, hit that subscribe button right now, because this goes places you won't believe. To understand what happened on that stage, you have to understand the 2 men standing on it. Fairfield, Connecticut, 1977. A kid named John grew up in a suburban house with parents who encouraged his hobbies, a bedroom full of posters, and unlimited access to his dad's record collection. Stevie Ray Vaughan, Eric Clapton, Jimi Hendrix. He didn't discover the blues in a juke joint or learn guitar from a dying master on a Mississippi porch. He discovered it on a CD player in his comfortable bedroom while doing homework. By the time John Mayer was 19, he dropped out of Berklee College of Music. Not because he couldn't afford it, not because life got in the way, but because he was already good enough that staying felt like a waste of time. The confidence of someone who's never had a door slammed in their face. He moved to Atlanta, formed a band, got discovered. By 2001, Your Body is a Wonderland was everywhere, soft rock, pop sensibility, guitar work that was technically impressive but radio-friendly, safe. The critics called him a sensitive singer-songwriter. Translation, not a real guitarist. Just a pretty boy with an acoustic who wrote songs that college girls cried to. But here's what the critics missed. John Mayer could actually play, not just play shred. Blues solos that would make session musicians stop and rewind. Phrasing that showed he'd done his homework. Tone that proved he understood the instrument on a level that most pop stars never bothered with. He was stuck in this weird limbo, too pop for the blues purists, too blues for the pop world to take seriously. A guitar player's guitar player trapped in a teen heartthrob's body. And he desperately wanted out. Now, on the other side of that stage, stood a man with a completely different story. Born in the aftermath of war, raised in smoke-filled clubs where wrong notes meant empty-tip jars, spent his 20s touring in vans that broke down in cities that didn't have his name on any marquee, played guitar on records you've definitely heard but never knew he was on, session work, backup gigs, paying dues wasn't a phrase, it was survival. By the time this man hit 40, he wasn't famous, but everyone who mattered knew his name. Studio musicians whispered it with reverence. Producers called him when they needed something authentic. He'd played with people whose names are carved into the foundation of rock and roll history. And he'd watched 1,000 pretty boys with record deals show up, get their 15 minutes, and disappear the moment the radio moved on. When he looked at John Mayer, he didn't see a fellow musician. He saw every manufactured pop star who'd ever been handed a guitar as a prop. Every major label priority who got opportunities that real players spent lifetimes earning. He saw everything wrong with the music industry, wrapped up in one incredibly punchable face. The performance was supposed to be collaborative, a blues standard. 2 guitars, 1 song, a moment of mutual respect. What actually happened was something else entirely. The arrangement was simple. John Mayer would start, establish the melody, set the tone. Then the legend would come in, they'd trade solos, the audience would applaud, everyone would shake hands, and the industry would get its photograph. Mayer stepped to the microphone, guitar strapped across his chest. He could feel every eye in the theater on him. Industry executives who'd signed his checks, critics who dismissed his albums, musicians whose respect he desperately wanted. And watching from 15 feet away, the man who was about to teach him exactly where he stood in the food chain. John started playing, clean, controlled, every note exactly where it belonged, the kind of performance you give when you're trying to prove something, when you've spent years being told you're not good enough and you finally have one chance to show them all they were wrong. The audience nodded along politely. Then the legend picked up his guitar. What happened next wasn't music, it was a statement. He didn't wait for his cue, didn't follow the arrangement, just came in hard and loud with a riff that grabbed the entire room by the throat. The kind of playing that doesn't ask for attention, it takes it. Bends that screamed. Vibrato that could shatter glass. 40 years of roadhouses and session studios and nights where the music was the only thing between him and oblivion, all of it compressed into 30 seconds that redefined what everyone in that theater thought they were about to hear. John Mayer's face did something that cameras caught and the internet would loop for years. A flicker of confusion, then realization, then something close to panic. Because this wasn't collaboration, this was a hostile takeover. The legend didn't look at Mayer, didn't acknowledge him, just played like he was the only person on that stage, like John Mayer was a stagehand who'd wandered into the spotlight by mistake. Every note was a challenge, every run was a reminder. You think you belong here. You think 3 years of radio play earned you this stage. Let me show you what 40 years actually sounds like. John kept playing because what else could he do? Stop, walk off, admit defeat in front of every person whose opinion mattered, so he stayed. He played his part, he hit his notes. But everyone in that room could hear it, could see it. He'd been demoted to backup musician at his own tribute. When the song ended, the applause was massive, but it wasn't for both of them. The cameras caught it. The audience on their feet facing one direction. The legend soaking it in, nodding, acknowledging the love. And John Mayer standing 3 feet away, smiling the smile of someone whose humiliation is being photographed in high definition. Then came the moment that would define the entire night. As they walked off stage, as the applause still thundered, the legend stopped, turned, looked directly at John Mayer. And in a voice just loud enough for the musicians standing nearby to hear, just quiet enough that no microphone caught it, he asked the question. Who taught you to play? Not nice job, not great performance, not even silence. Who taught you to play? 4 words that contained an entire philosophy. The implication was nuclear. You're not self-taught. You're not authentic. Someone showed you this. You didn't earn it. You borrowed it. And whoever taught you did a mediocre job because you're still playing like someone who learned guitar from YouTube tutorials and Berkeley textbooks instead of life. John Mayer stood there, frozen, every comeback he'd thought of evaporating, every defense sounding pathetic before it reached his mouth. A dozen people witnessed it. Musicians, stage crew, industry people who would dine on that story for years. The legend didn't wait for an answer, just turned and walked away, leaving John Mayer standing alone in the wings with a guitar in his hands and a question hanging in the air like cigarette smoke. If you can feel where this is going, hit that like button because what John Mayer did next shocked everyone. The internet exploded before John Mayer even left the building. Forums lit up. Music blogs ran frame-by-frame breakdowns of Mayer's face during the performance. The phrase, destroyed on stage, trended. Think pieces were written. Guitar magazines ran polls asking if Mayer deserved the humiliation. The consensus was pretty clear. John Mayer had been exposed. The pop star who thought he could play with the real musicians had been publicly reminded of his place. And for most people, that would have been the end of it. The smart play would have been to stay quiet, let it blow over, stick to the pop lane, except that there are levels to this game and he simply hadn't earned the right to play at that altitude. John Mayer did the opposite. 3 days after the incident, he canceled a promotional appearance. Then another. His publicist released a statement about focusing on the music, industry code for The client is having a breakdown. But that's not what was happening. What was actually happening was that John Mayer had locked himself in a rehearsal studio in Manhattan with one goal: to answer the question, who taught you to play? He went back to the beginning, spent 16 hours a day with his guitar, not writing songs, not preparing for tour, just playing, scales, exercises, the fundamentals that successful people forget because they no longer need them. He called in favors, reached out to session musicians who'd played with people whose names you know, asked them to show him what he was missing, to teach him what Berkeley couldn't, what radio success had let him skip. There's a story, probably true, that he reached out to Buddy Guy, the actual Buddy Guy, blues legend, a man who'd forgotten more about guitar than most people ever learn. Mayer asked if he could come to Chicago, not for a collaboration, not for a photo op, to learn. Buddy Guy, according to people who were there, looked at this kid who'd just been humiliated on national television, who had every reason to retreat into his pop career and pretend the guitar stuff didn't matter, and said yes. For 6 months, John Mayer basically disappeared. No interviews, no performances, no radio play. Just practice. October 2003. A small club in Chicago, not an arena, not a theater. A venue that held maybe 300 people. The kind of place with sticky floors and bathroom graffiti and zero separation between the audience and the stage. Word got out that John Mayer was playing. Not a concert, not a tour stop. A blues set, real blues. The announcement was so low-key that most people thought it was a rumor. The club filled up anyway. Music journalists, session players, people who wanted to watch the follow-up to his public humiliation. The schadenfreude crowd hopping for a second disaster they could write about. John Mayer walked on stage in a t-shirt and jeans. No production, no lights, no backup band, just a local rhythm section he'd met once for 30 minutes of rehearsal that afternoon. He picked up his guitar, and then he played. What came out was something nobody in that room expected. This wasn't Pop John. This wasn't Your Body is a Wonderland John. This wasn't even the John Mayer who'd been embarrassed at the Beacon Theater. This was someone new, someone who'd spent 6 months being surgically broken down and rebuilt. Every note carried weight that hadn't been there before. The phrasing was different, deeper, less concerned with being impressive and more concerned with being true. He played a Muddy Waters cover that would have made Muddy Waters nod. He played an original blues that sounded like it had been written in 1957 instead of last week. He played with the kind of authority that you can't fake and can't learn from a textbook. Somewhere in the middle of the set, he stopped talking between songs and just let the guitar speak. No explanations, no justifications, no answering the question he'd been asked. Just proof. A music journalist for the Chicago Tribune was there, wrote a review that ran 3 days later. One line in particular: John Mayer didn't show up to prove his critics wrong. He showed up because he finally understood what they'd been right about. The people who'd watched him get destroyed 6 months earlier started hearing about the Chicago show. Then other shows, small venues, blues clubs, places where John Mayer had no commercial reason to be, playing for audiences that didn't care about his radio hits. He was rebuilding, not his reputation, his foundation. Here's the part of the story nobody tells. A year after the Beacon Theater incident, John Mayer got a call. From the legend himself. No publicists, no intermediaries, a direct call. According to Mayer, who discussed this years later in an interview that most people missed, the conversation lasted about 4 minutes. The legend had heard about the club shows, had heard what Mayer was doing. Someone had sent him a bootleg recording of the Chicago performance. And he called to say 3 words that John Mayer admits he'd spent 12 months desperately needing to hear. You get it. Not an apology, not an explanation, not a long conversation about that night or what it meant. Just acknowledgement, from the one person whose acknowledgement actually mattered. You get it. The difference between someone who's good and someone who belongs isn't talent. It's understanding that the music is bigger than you, that the tradition you're stepping into was built by people who suffered for it, who lived it, who didn't have the option of going back to a comfortable pop career when things got hard. That night at the Beacon Theater, John Mayer didn't get it yet. A year later, he did. The legend didn't need to explain. Mayer didn't need to ask. The work had done the talking. They never became friends, never collaborated, never appeared on stage together again. But the next time John Mayer's name came up in an interview, the legend didn't dismiss him, didn't mock him, just said, "He's serious." Which, coming from him, was the equivalent of a standing ovation. John Mayer's career changed after that year. He formed the John Mayer Trio, put out Try in 2005, a live blues album that featured 0 pop songs and maximum guitar. Critics who'd written him off as a lightweight suddenly had to reconcile the fact that this guy could actually hang with serious musicians. He started getting called to play with legends, not as a novelty, not as the pop star dabbling in blues, as a peer. Buddy Guy brought him on stage. B.B. King invited him to collaborate. Eric Clapton, yes, that Eric Clapton, asked him to join the Crossroads Guitar Festival alongside players who'd spent 40 years earning their chairs. But here's the thing that matters more than any of that. John Mayer stopped trying to prove he belonged. He just belonged. There's an interview from 2008 where someone asked him about the Beacon Theater incident, about being humiliated, about that question. Mayer smiled and said something that should be taught in every music school. He didn't humiliate me. He asked me a question I couldn't answer yet, so I went and found the answer. That's not spin. That's not PR damage control. That's someone who understood what most people never do. That ego is the enemy of mastery. The people who get destroyed by criticism are the people who were built on a foundation of ego to begin with. The people who survive it, who come back stronger, are the ones who realize that criticism, especially the brutal, unfair, public kind, is just information. You can be offended by it, or you can use it. John Mayer used it. Here's what nobody talks about. That legend who humiliated John Mayer on stage. He did the same thing to someone else 20 years earlier, and that person quit music entirely. He's done it to dozens of young players over the years. Some survived, most didn't. Because the test isn't, can you handle being embarrassed? The test is, what do you do after? Do you retreat? Do you make excuses? Do you spend the rest of your career bitter about the one time someone made you look bad? Or do you go into the woodshed and emerge as someone who can't be embarrassed anymore, because you've finally done the work that makes the criticism irrelevant? Most people choose the first path. It's easier, it's safer, you get to keep your ego intact. John Mayer chose the second path. And that's why 15 years after being publicly destroyed, he's still here, still respected, still growing. Not because he was the most talented guitarist of his generation, but because he was willing to admit he wasn't, and then do something about it. The greatest musicians aren't the ones who never get challenged. They're the ones who get challenged and come back with an answer. If this story taught you something, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below. What's the harshest criticism you've ever received, and what did you do with it? Because the difference between people who make it and people who don't is never about avoiding the fire. It's about what you build after you've been burned.